In 1988, director John McTiernan and star Bruce Willis gave the world an explosive entry into the world of Christmas cinema.
In 2020, I run out of clever things to say because this pairing speaks for itself.
The film is Die Hard.
The whiskey is High West Yippee Ki Yay.
And we'll review them both. This is
the Film and Whiskey Podcast. Welcome to the Film and Whiskey Podcast, where each week we review a classic movie and a glass of whiskey. I'm Bob Book.
I'm Brad G.
And this week we are looking at the masterpiece of 1980s action cinema, Die Hard.
You know my name, but who are you? Just another American who saw too many movies as a child. Another orphan of a bankrupt culture who thinks he's John Wayne, Rambo, Marshall Dillon.
I was always kind of partial to Roy Rogers, actually. I really like those sequin shirts.
Do you really think you have a chance against us, Mr. Cowboy?
Yippee Ki Yay, motherfucker.
So we are getting into the Christmas season for real now, Brad. It's 10 day. We're 10 days away from Christmas Eve, and we figured why not just kind of split the difference, because this is one of those movies that the debate comes up every year. Is Die Hard a Christmas movie? I think it absolutely is a Christmas movie. But just to appease those people who would, balk at us putting this as our Christmas film, we put it 1 week before our Christmas film. So we're still in the Christmas vibe, still in the Christmas season, and I think it's a perfect time to talk about Die Hard.
Bob, all I have to say for the haters out there is Christmas is a holiday about the arrival of Jesus Christ on earth. And Jesus Christ was all about the reconciliation of families. And if Die Hard isn't all about the reconciliation of families, I don't know how much more Christmas themed you can get.
You know what's really funny? I just saw a meme online the other day, Brad, and it said that Die Hard's not a Christmas movie. It's a movie about people who are trapped in a hopeless situation and are awaiting a savior to come and rescue them. It's clearly an Advent movie.
Hey,
let's
go.
If that's the case, then hey, it's perfect timing to be talking about this movie. But whatever your affiliation with this movie and the Christmas holiday is, honestly, Brad, it's always a good time to talk about Die Hard.
Bob, I'm not going to lie. I had been down on the 1980s for such a long time in this podcast. Like movie after movie after movie from the 80s just was a huge disappointment and letdown. And here we are with Die Hard.
Mm-hmm.
We're kind of on a run here. I really enjoyed Big for our Thanksgiving bonus episode. And here we are with Die Hard, and I'm just going to spoil it. I love this movie, Bob.
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard not to love this movie, Brad. And I think before we get into talking about the movie itself, before we get into Brad Explains any of that, I do think it's worth talking about the sort of 1980s of it all. Because the 80s were a decade for some crazy action films. There's a few studios out there that were really famous for making like these low budget, ultra violent action movies in the 1980s. And I feel like before Die Hard comes out, you had started to see the genre get a little bit tired. Like we were on our third Rambo movie at that point. It's literally just, you have an Arnold Schwarzenegger movie or you have a Sylvester Stallone movie where they're all just shooting up nameless armies of people. It's incredibly violent. Stuff's blowing up. And the genre really needed something to inject it with new life. And I don't think it can be underestimated what Die Hard did for the action genre, especially because, it took the career of this guy, Bruce Willis, who was semi-famous. He was kind of in the same place that Tom Hanks was with Big in some ways. He was coming off of an incredibly successful TV show, but, he wasn't an A-list movie star yet. And they put this guy in this movie who's in some ways a badass in this movie, but he's a badass in a different way than an Arnold Schwarzenegger. Arnold was a badass to people because he was like this unstoppable machine. He was built different than anyone else on Earth could be built. Bruce Willis is not a very tall man, and, he has somewhat toned muscles in this movie, but he's an attainable kind of figure. And to put your sort of average Joe cop in a scenario like this, I think it really brought the action genre back down to earth a little bit, and it did give the whole genre new life. And I don't think we can underestimate the impact of that.
Well, and when you talk about Bruce Willis in this movie, I think the reason he is so effective is kind of what we talked about in our Sixth Sense episode, in that Bruce Willis always kind of gives off this tired, world-weary vibe that doesn't always work in every movie, but it literally just hits a home run in Die Hard.
Yeah, and I don't know if I would go so far as to call it like a world weariness. It's almost like a really smarmy, it's a smart-ass thing, right? Like that's how he gets under the skin of the terrorists in this movie, is he just continually does smart-ass things to them. And I think that also is different than the sort of one-liners you get in an Arnold Schwarzenegger movie, where he says a one-liner before he kills you. Whereas in this movie, it's Bruce Willis who's just toying with these guys who are incredibly dangerous. And that sort of comedy, that little bit of levity you get with this movie, I think does wonders. And that's, to be honest, Brad, that's why this is one of my favorite action movies of all time.
Well, it's a big statement to say this is one of your favorite action movies of all time. What would be like something you would point to, Bob, whether it's a performance or the direction or the sound editing? Like where does this movie shine so brightly that it just blasts it into that upper echelon for you?
This isn't something that I don't know if you can really put it on one person as much as it's everyone kind of working together to make it the way it is. But Brad, this movie is just so tight and it moves at such a great clip where, I mean, there's moments where I wish it would slow down and take a breath. But for the most part, every time the audience needs a breather, it gets one. And it doesn't linger too long before it gets back to the action. They always know when to lighten up a scene with a funny line of dialogue. I think the action is inventive. It's not like it's really easy to follow. It's not incoherent. So, in a large part, I think it really does fall on the shoulders of John McTiernan for his really crystal clear direction. But I think the writing and the editing are just a notch above what you see in most action movies as well. Like it's very clear that they had a sense of purpose about how this movie was supposed to move, how it was supposed to work. And it just does. Like everything about this movie clicks and it works perfectly.
There's not a single moment in this film where you're asking yourself, oh man, when are we going to get to the next part? Because you're so utterly engrossed with everything that happens. And honestly, we're so engrossed with this film, Bob, I think we've forgotten to do America's favorite segment.
Yeah. That segment is called Brad Explains. It's where Brad breaks down the plot of the movie that he has just seen for the first time. Brad, it sounds like this was not your first time seeing this movie. Would that be correct?
Oh, yeah. This is probably... this might have been getting me into the double digits.
Oh, great. So it is such a simplistic plot. I don't know if we need to hit every single beat of what happens. Can you give us just a really condensed summary of what happens in the movie Die Hard?
Yeah, so Bruce Willis is a New York cop, and he's heading off to Los Angeles to meet up with his estranged wife, who moved out there with their kids, and seemingly trying to mend fences. He learns an incredibly important lesson on the airplane that you should take your shoes off and curl your toes together whenever you get off the plane. And that's like one of the most important things you need to know for your entire life. I cannot stress the importance of knowing that you should curl your toes on the carpet.
And
it's really, really important.
Like, what's the reasoning? Did he say it relieved like motion sickness, or what was it that it was supposed to like take the edge off?
I think it's just like the tension of flying and like all the like, I don't know, that like ennui that you get with flying where you're just like, oh my God, like I just want to be done with this. I think that's what it does.
Okay. All right.
Bob, I'm surprised you haven't tried this before.
I don't like flying, man.
So he gets to LA and a limo picks him up from his wife's incredibly successful corporation that she took this job for, which moved her out to LA. And this limo takes him out to the Nakatomi Plaza, this massive skyscraper. and the driver drops him off and tells him that he'll wait here for a little while for him if he needs a ride. So he goes up, he sees his wife, there's people doing coke, it's wild and crazy. It's the 80s.
Yeah.
It's the 80s. Let's go. And he meets some of the people and he gets into a fight with Holly. And so, lo and behold, he takes his shoes off and he knots his toes on the carpet. And then, like, all hell breaks loose. And these crazy German and Dutch guys take over the building. And they're, like, trying to blow a hole open in the safe to take all these bonds. They're supposed to make, like, millions and millions of dollars. I will say, Bob, I was actually impressed. I feel like I watch a lot of these older movies, and they're like, we're going to rob you for $50,000.
Right.
I'm like, no, this was like $600 million. That's a lot of money, even back in 1988. So anyways, the rest of the movie is Bruce just being Bruce and kicking ass and taking names. And he fights the main antagonist, Hans Gruber, played by Alan Rickman, in a memorable performance. There's lots of great one-liners. He cuts his feet up. He's dragging himself all over. Over the radio, he connects with Reginald VelJohnson, who is a local police officer who weirdly can't shoot his gun anymore, but don't worry, at the end of the movie, he can. He just kicks a lot of butt, and Holly, his wife, is like in love with him for killing a bunch of bad guys, and everybody's happy in the end. Oh, and the principal from the Breakfast Club is in this, and guess what? He's a big old jerk.
All right, so that's the thing I want to go in on off Brad Explains, because the funny thing is, you know, we just did the episode on Big a few weeks ago, where John Hurd was in that movie playing the Weasley prick. And then in this movie, Paul Gleason shows up and he's playing the Weasley prick. And I just wonder how much those two guys competed for these roles in the late 1980s, because it was just back and forth between these two.
I feel like he saw John Hurd leaving the audition and was just like, daggone it. Not again.
Hurd. So, Brad, you know, where do you want to go from here? I think we should talk about Bruce Willis's performance, because 30 plus years on, the world has Bruce Willis fatigue at this point. And Bruce Willis has a very not great reputation as far as working with people now. He's known for being difficult. And I think more than that, he's known for being stubborn. Like, he just continues to try to do these action movies now where up front he says, I want, $12 million or whatever it is. And so these movies that he's making now are basically like direct-to-video movies where the whole budget went towards paying Bruce Willis, but he doesn't care because he's getting paid. And I think sometimes it's hard for us to remember that once in a while, when he cares, he can be really good. And this is before he became Bruce Willis, A-list actor. And he's really giving his all here. And, this is like the original thing that he copies for 30 years. But watching the original, it's still a glorious thing to watch. And I don't think he's ever topped this performance, Brad.
No, he really hasn't. I think Sixth Sense is it's just such a different movie from the rest of his films.
Yeah, he's playing against type in that one, for sure.
Right. Like, so I'd put that movie up there as far as some of his greatest performances. But as far as peak Bruce Willis being Bruce Willis, you cannot beat Die Hard. I mean, he's just romping around this set, chewing up scenery. He's yelling at the cops as they turn around because they canceled the alarm. He just is at the top of his game. And like you said, Bob, there's a reason this movie launched him to become an A-list star.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And then on the other side of things, you've got Alan Rickman making his screen debut as Hans Gruber. And Brad, I have to say, one of the best debut performances of all time. I don't think it's an understatement at this point to say that. It's not just because we're looking back on Alan Rickman's career now in retrospect and thinking about how great he was. He truly makes a memorable and compelling villain. And I don't think that people give enough credit to that sometimes. How many James Bond movies have we had now? I think Bond 25 is coming out next year. And there's maybe 5 people that I would say have been truly memorable James Bond villains. when you get a part like this, it's really difficult to make an imprint on people and a kind of lasting legacy as the big bad in a movie like this, and he knocks it out of the park.
Mr. Takagi, I'm really not interested in your computer. But I need the code key because I am interested in the $640 million in negotiable bearer bonds that you have locked in your vault. And the computer controls the vault.
I'm glad you brought up the Bond movies because, like you said, there's just so many of them that it's hard to pinpoint, who was a great villain in those films. But what it illustrates is that in a lot of different action movies, when you have the focus on the hero all the time, on your James Bond or your John McClane or your Ethan Hunt, it can be easy to lose track of the bad guys. And yet, I think what makes for the best of any of those films is when you have a spectacular bad guy.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Philip Seymour Hoffman in Mission Impossible 3 is utterly fantastic, and it makes it probably my favorite of the Mission Impossible movies.
Sure.
So when you have Rickman in this movie with like you said, Bob, a debut performance, I mean, you can tell that the dude has acted for a long time, but as Hans Gruber, he just brings so much panache to the table. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
He's just got some chutzpah. And you almost find yourself rooting for him at certain times in the movie.
One of the things that I love about his performance, though, too, is that he's not a sort of mustache twirling villain. He's not like the old school Bond villains who are really over the top and conniving and things like that. You know, he just seems like a guy who's been doing this for a long time, who is kind of minorly inconvenienced by John McClane's presence. You know, at least until everyone starts dying, and then it becomes more of an inconvenience for him. But the thing that I love about it is that he plays it, and I'm going to go back to a phrase that you used earlier, Brad, kind of world weary. This is just another day at the office. Let's just do the stuff we're here to do. He plays it like a professional and not like a villain that's scheming to take over the world. Do you know what I mean? It's very grounded. And I think that really helps balance out the sort of smarminess that you get from Bruce Willis. They really play off each other well.
Yeah, and I think that's the key, Bob, is having a good villain and hero combination. That when you find the right two actors or actresses to play against each other in these roles, that's what ignites the conflict in the movie, and that's what gets people to come back to movies over and over and over again.
And I think that this is also a good place for us to kind of praise the script and the way that they developed these characters, because I don't think anybody would ever argue that John McClane is the smartest guy on earth. Do you know what I mean? He's very clearly presented as a wise-ass New York cop, right? And he just kind of uses street smarts and trickery to get the better of some of these terrorists. But the thing that I love about it, though, is Rickman is always the guy who's presented as the smarter guy. On paper, he should have been able to pull off this heist. He did everything correct. And he just happens to have this thorn in the flesh, this guy that's constantly nagging him until John McClane somehow wins. And I love that it's like the anti-James Bond. It's the anti-Batman, where Batman is presented as smarter than everybody else and he outwits everyone. I don't think that's really what McClane does here. He just kind of stays alive and weasels his way around until everyone else is dead. And that's the end of the movie. And I think it's such a great touch to have the ordinary guy doing ordinary things and somehow still coming out on top at the end of the movie. And they do it in a way that feels realistic.
Right. I mean, he really, in the end, just annoys the heck out of the terrorists until they come to find him, and then he kills them all.
Right.
And that's pretty much it.
Like even at the end when Hans Gruber dies and he falls off the building, he's really surprised that this is happening to him. I love that last look that they give on Alan Rickman's face as he falls to his death. And watching it now, I was thinking the last thought in his mind was probably just like, how in the hell did this guy like get the better of me? Because on paper, it never should have happened. And again, I think that it's just really smart, clever writing. You know, I don't want to use the word subvert, but it really went against everything you saw in action movies in the 80s where the hero was just bigger and stronger and could overpower everybody else.
Yeah, I think that Die Hard's greatest success is in its ability to convince you that John McClane shouldn't win. That, like, every time I watch this movie, I am utterly convinced that there's absolutely no way in heaven or hell that John McClane should be able to take down these well-organized, well-funded, well-armed terrorists. And yet somehow, every single time I watch the movie, he's able to do it.
Yeah.
And the ability to draw the wool over the audience's eyes in a certain sense and make them just fall in love with the idea of this guy overcoming all the odds to win. It's just pure entertainment at its finest.
Well, Brad, I am so enjoying talking about this movie, but I'm even more excited to get into drinking today's whiskey. So what do you say we try this High West Yippee Ki Yay?
Let's get to it.
All right, so today we are trying High West Yippee Ki Yay. Now, Brad, I don't know if you'll remember, but this is actually the second whiskey from the High West company that we've had on this podcast. A few seasons ago, we tried the High West Campfire. And, you know, for those of you who maybe haven't listened to that episode, I'll give a little bit more background about the company. High West is known primarily for blending sourced whiskeys. So I know that they have built this giant facility and that they are making some of their own whiskeys now. But like most distilleries that are just kind of getting up on their feet when they first start, they started sourcing whiskey. And what they made their name on was being able to really expertly blend together whiskeys from other places. And the High West Yippee Ki Yay is really no exception to that. The really cool thing about this, Brad, is that they took one of their blended sourced whiskeys called the High West Double Rye, and then they took that and then finished it in wine barrels. So the High West Double Rye is something you can actually buy on the shelf. It's a widely available product. That blend contains 3 different kinds of rye, one with a 95% rye mash bill, one with an 80% rye mash bill, and one with a 53% rye mash bill. It's a really cool blend. But they took this and they finished it in vermouth barrels and in Syrah barrels. And so it's like compounding the amount of things that they can possibly be blending together. I am super excited to try this, Brad. I don't know if we've ever had a wine-finished rye whiskey before.
Yeah, this is definitely a first for the podcast. And as I get into nosing it, Bob, I am just blown away. This whiskey has depth. It has some nice sweet notes on it, a little bit of caramel, a little bit of vanilla. But the overarching smell that I am getting is almost like a deep, dry red, like red wine, almost like a plum, a little bit of fruitiness. It's a beautiful whiskey on the nose.
I think plum is a really good note, Brad. It has some dark stone fruit to it. The Syrah is really coming through for me, and it really plays well with the rye. Like, I can't tell at first, is it tipping into the vermouth side of things? Because you get that little bit of a spice and some kind of saline notes that might be the vermouth, but then it goes right back to that classic dark red wine smell. All of these things are marrying together really, really well. It's an incredibly complex nose and one that I don't want to stop smelling. Like I'm going back for more when I should be drinking it. So I think that's a really good sign, Brad. I think I'm going to give this a 9 out of 10 on the nose.
Yeah, Bob, everything on this nose gets me excited to dive into this whiskey. I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10 as well.
All right, Brad. Well, let's just dive right in. I want to see what this thing tastes like, so let's do it. All right, so Here's the thing, like the only wine finished whiskeys we've had, we've had quite a few sherried scotches, obviously. But in terms of dark red wine finishes, they've all been bourbons. And so this is the first time that we haven't really had the wine barrel flavor infused into that bourbon sweetness. Instead, it's that almost kind of sour rye flavor. So you got the spice of the rye here, but also that more sour taste. And so I don't think it's bad at all, Brad. It's just something that we've never had before. And so it's a little harder to evaluate a finished rye because we have nothing to compare it to.
Yeah, I'm struggling a little bit on the flavor here. I feel like, I don't know, Bob, did it taste almost just a little bit watery to you?
No, I think that the mouth feels a little bit thin. I got this really interesting note just now as I was talking because I just finished swallowing. And as I was breathing out, I almost got like the grape candy flavor on the way out on the back of my tongue. I like this a lot, Brad. I think you should give it a second and third sip before we maybe give a score because I've found that my second and third sip have been much, much better. It has a ton of red wine characteristics. It's got a nice little chest burn on the way down. But overall, a pretty easy sipper, and it is only 92 proof. I think it drinks a little bit hotter than a 92 proof. I would probably have put this somewhere closer to a 100 proof if I was just tasting this blind. And I think it packs a nice punch, but it delivers on the flavor as well. I wasn't sure where to go at first. I think I'm actually going to give this an 8 out of 10 on the flavor, Brad.
Yeah, I'm kind of in a similar spot. I think it has some nice flavors going on. Like you said, it's got a little bit of that fruitiness that I think you're getting from the wine barrels that's really, really, really good. I'm a little bit softer on it than you are. I'm going to give it a 7.5 out of 10 on the flavor.
All right, so that takes us to finish. Like I said, this does not have a super long-lasting finish. What lingers in the mouth is those great dark grape flavors, which are almost closer on the finish, Brad, to like a Concord grape flavor than a wine grape. And I like that. I think that the alcohol is pleasant. There's just a little bit of warming sensation on the way down. Nothing that lingers for too long. I don't know if I would call this a great finish, but it certainly doesn't detract from anything else. So I'll give it a 7 on the finish.
Yeah, Bob, I'm literally in the same spot. I think it's a solid finish. The burn is really, really nice. It's not overly powerful, but like you said, it hits you in all the right ways. And I think that in the end, this is just a really solid whiskey. It's not blowing me away in any one department. So I think for finish, I'm going to give it a 7 out of 10.
All right, that takes us to overall balance. This is where we talk about nose, taste, and finish all put together. Brad, I think like you said, this is just a really solid whiskey all around. There was kind of a slight decrease for me at each interval. I gave the nose a 9, the taste an 8, the finish a 7, but I mean, that still balances everything out to an 8 overall. And so I think I'm going to go ahead and give the balance on this an 8.5 out of 10. Again, this is the first finished rye that we've had on the show, and I don't really think that we're going to have one anytime soon that's going to top this. So I'll give it an 8.5 on the balance.
I think the balance on this whiskey is just okay, Bob. I like you said, it kind of tails off after a while. It was a little bit, I wish that there was a little bit more to it, whether it's the viscosity or the flavor. It just was kind of lacking overall in a few certain areas. And that's not to say it's not a great whiskey. I have enjoyed it. I think I'm going to give it a 7.5 on the balance.
All right, Brad, this is where things are going to get interesting because now we're moving into our value score. In the state of Ohio, this bottle is pretty pricey. Now, again, we said that what they do to make this is they take their double rye and then they finish it in these different wine barrels. The High West double rye is only $39.99. And when High West released this is a special release, so they're not currently continuing to produce it, although you can still find it on the shelf. When they first released it, they gave it an MSRP of $79.99, which I actually think isn't a terrible price for this. However, you can't really find it for $79.99 anywhere, and in the state of Ohio, they're actually selling it for $99.99. So I guess we're going to have to go with what it would cost us as the consumer, Brad. Even though MSRP is $79, we are not going to be able to pick this whiskey up for less than $100 in the state of Ohio. So I don't know. What's your gut reaction to that figure, Brad?
It's about double the price it should be. Like in my mind, this is like anywhere from like a $45 to $60 bottle of whiskey, and I'd probably give it an 8 to a 9 out of 10 on value. But sitting here at 100, that just feels pretty far overpriced. And I get it. It's an interesting, fun whiskey. It's got a cool name, cool marketing, and it tastes really good overall. But $100, Bob, we've had better whiskeys for much less money than this.
Yeah, I agree with that. I do think that, again, with some of these distilleries that are known for their blending techniques, you do have to take the process into account a little bit. And so I was expecting this to be a little bit more. And so when I saw that SRP was $79, I actually thought, all right, that's not a terrible value, considering that just the rye by itself is already $40. I think this is definitely worth almost double what you would get with just a regular rye. I'm interested to see that Ohio has marked it up so much to $99. And if that's the case, then I imagine it's probably that much everywhere in the United States. And so you're right, Brad, at the price you're actually picking it up at, I think it's just way too high. I'm only going to give it a 5.5 on the value.
Yeah, I'm right there with you, Bob. I'll give it a 5 out of 10 on value. It's a solid whiskey all around. Like when you add up just our regular scores, I'm sitting at a 31 out of 40. Like this is, 3 out of 4 stars, really good whiskey. But when you add in that price range, ooh, it takes a hit for me in my mind.
All right, Brad. So that's bringing me out to a 38 out of 50. What's that bringing you to?
I'm right next to you, 36 out of 50.
All right, so that's going to take our average to a 37 out of 50 or a 74 out of 100. I actually think that if you had asked me to just put a figure on this without going through all this analysis, I would have thought this would score higher than a 74, but that value score really did take this down a peg in both of our estimations. Overall, though, I would still highly recommend this whiskey if you can find it somewhere just to give it a try. I've really enjoyed the experience of trying a finished rye.
Yeah, it's really fascinating to me. I feel like this season, if I had to call season 3 anything, I feel like it's been the season of rye. Because we've had so many different, just really good ryes, whether they're young, a little more mature, whether they're finished. And I've just been impressed with literally almost all of them.
Yeah.
So overall, Yippee Ki Yay, they're knocking it out of the park.
All right, Brad, so what do you say we get back into talking about the movie Die Hard?
Let's get to it.
All right, so that was High West, Yippee Ki Yay. We are getting back into talking about Die Hard. And Brad, I feel like we have both been just effusive in our praise for this movie. So maybe it's time for us to just kind of pick a few nits. Because as good as this movie is, and it is a nearly perfect example of an action movie, I'm not entirely sure that it's actually like a flawless film. So I'd like to hear, do you have any nitpicks that kind of stuck with you throughout the movie, any kind of plot holes, or do you really think that this is like as good as it gets when it comes to action films?
I'm pretty close to thinking it's as good as it gets, but I will say, I don't know, maybe they work because they're so corny, but hire better terrorists. Like those actors are so bad. And I don't know. And even the, what was the coked up guy that tries to bargain with Hans?
Yeah.
He's like trying to act like he's Joe Pesci, but he's just not. Like he just can't pull off that amount of overacting. So there's a few little things like that, but then there's a part of it where I'm like, I don't know, the overacting and the ridiculousness of the terrorists, that's almost like a part of the charm of the movie. So I don't know if I'm actually like complaining about it.
Yeah, I was actually okay with the coked up guy that works with Holly. Like, I thought that he did a really good job of being a huge douche. Because he kept saying like, babe, come on, babe. And I thought it was so funny watching Alan Rickman put up with this guy, even for like the 30 seconds before he shoots him.
Oh, the fake fascination that he shows is just impeccable.
Hey, business is business. You use a gun, I use a fountain pen. What's the difference? Let's put it in my terms. You're here in a hostile takeover. You grab us for some green mail, but you didn't expect some poison pill was going to be running around in the building. Am I right? Hans, Bobby, I'm your white knight.
However, I think you're right about the terrorists. And if I had any flaws with the movie or nitpicks with the film, it's that they try to pay off every single thing. And for the most part, they do. And I actually think this is a really well-written script, like in terms of setting things up and paying them off. But I thought that resurrecting the guy who got choked to death with a chain and was hanging 40 feet above a concrete floor, like, how the hell did he get out of that? It's not even just like, oh, that guy's still alive. It's like, if he was still alive, how could he have possibly gotten out of that predicament? Went and found a gun, figured out where everybody went, wandered down to the lobby with the gun, and then gone outside and like sprayed bullets all over the place. And they do it all just so that, Officer Carl Winslow can get his mojo back and shoot a guy, which is also
move
like
to Chicago with his family.
Exactly. Which is also a really weird character beat. Like, setting aside how weirdly creepy and relevant it is that he got reassigned for shooting a kid, not fired, just reassigned for shooting a kid.
And the fact that McClane is just like brushes right over it. He's like, oh yeah,
he's like,
job's tough.
Happens to the best of us. We've all shot kids, haven't we? Right? But then the way that they like reestablish him as, getting back in the swing of things is, well, we have to give him somebody to shoot. He has to learn how to shoot people again if he's going to be a cop. It's just it's a really weird message to send at the end of the film when we've already had more than enough people get shot for, to justify the price of a movie ticket. And it's like, that's the only thing in the movie that really just, it was gratuitous. It was unnecessary. Like, I think that Officer Carl Winslow had proved himself plenty without having to shoot a terrorist.
Yeah, but Bob, if he was going to get his mojo back, did you want to see a scene of him like in the shrink's office, sitting on the couch, like realizing, you know what? I can shoot people again. Or having a recently dead terrorist pop up like Jesus Christ out of the grave and be like, blop, blop. I'm a cop again.
Oh, man. All right, Brad. Well, on that note, I think it's time for us to give our final scores on this Christmas time classic. So, Brad, where are you sitting on Die Hard?
I'm hoping that you're going to give it a 9 out of 10 because I want to give it a 9.5 out of 10. I do think that this is like somewhere between a 9 and a 9.25, but I just love this movie, Bob. Like there's not many action films that do a better job of creating a world that you can revisit over and over and over again and just utterly lose yourself in the drama, in the action, in the thrill of it all. I just think McTiernan does a masterful job of entertaining the audience. Like we talk about films being like, it feels like there's this dichotomy of, well, they're either there to entertain the audience or challenge the audience. And I think if you buy into that, this movie is the perfect example of how to entertain an audience.
Oh, absolutely. And Brad, I think it's funny that you mentioned where your score range would fall because mine was falling somewhere between an 8.5 and a 9. And I think that, I probably enjoyed this movie more than it is a great film, if that makes sense. Like, it really just clicks. Even though I do still have issues with it, I think it's an absolutely worthwhile movie to watch. And like you said, Brad, it's an almost flawless example of what an action movie could be. I do kind of wish that they had given the terrorists a little bit more of a motivation. And I was thinking back to last time I had seen it and I was thinking, I think there's one more like double cross or there's one more layer where you actually find out that they wanted something different. But no, they're just like, hey, we're here for the bank bonds. And that's what it is for the whole movie. So I do think that there could have been a little bit more of something there. But overall, like, how can you knock Die Hard? I'm going to give this movie a 9 out of 10, and that's going to bring our average to a 9.25 out of 10. But we want to know what you think, so please get on social media. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram at Film Whiskey.
Or you can leave us a voicemail. Let your voice be heard on the Film and Whiskey podcast. Our phone number is 216-800-5923. Once again, that number is 216-800-5923. Or leave us a voicemail right on our website, which is anchor.fm/filmwhiskey.
Next week for Christmas, we will be back watching my favorite Christmas movie of all time, It's a Wonderful Life. Brad, I can't wait to talk about that one. For the Film and Whiskey podcast, I'm Bob Book.
I'm Brad G.
And we'll see you next time. Film and Whiskey is produced, engineered, and edited by Bob Book and Brad G. And it's made possible from support from listeners like you. If you'd like to support the show, you can donate directly to us at our Anchor page, anchor.fm/filmwhiskey, where you can support the show for as little as $1 a month. Or if you'd like some perks, donate to our Patreon page. You can find us on patreon.com/filmwhiskey, where for as little as $3 a month, you'll receive benefits like membership to an exclusive Discord chat room, extended cuts of each episode, and early access to every Film and Whiskey episode. We want to say thank you again to our Patreon supporters, especially those sponsoring us at our highest viscosity level, and that includes our friends Corey Easterday, James Talbert, Austin Dupree, and Aperture Flash. We'll see you next week.